Another deep breath. That was great. Thank you so much.
That was gold, yeah.
Yes. Just a reminder, please, when you get a chance today, pull out your phone and use this QR code. We'll see it a few more times today, so we really value your feedback, and it's really important for us to, as we design programs in the future going forward, to be able to utilize that feedback to improve our programs. So thank you for that. We'll put the QR code a couple more times for folks. So don't worry if you don't have it right now, because we are at a very, very high point of our program, and we're just getting started. So I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Wesley Thompson has practiced medicine for more than 37 years and opened Amity Group here in Charlotte with 4 locations. He recently retired from patient care, but he provided care to the HIV/AIDS population and the LGBTQ community of Mecklenburg County and surrounding counties to more than 1,000 people living with HIV. And 400 people of trans experience and more than 600 people on prep. He is a board-certified physician assistant and the first physician assistant to be certified as an HIV specialist in the state of North Carolina and one of the first in the United States. He has co-investigated in over 60 clinical trials for new medications to treat HIV. He speaks English, Spanish, and American Sign Language. He has lectured locally, statewide, and nationally. This is the edited version, by the way. I want you to know. I had to cut it back because he has a lot, and we're really thrilled to have him here today. But he's lectured locally, statewide, and nationally to medical conferences, to patient groups, and provider groups. Served on many local and national boards, and received numerous awards. Again, too numerous to mention here, but I do want to point out that in 2021. He was awarded the National PA in HIV Care by POCM, and he serves as one of the chairs of the American Academy of HIV Medicine. So that is the organization in this country, one of the organizations that accredits HIV specialists. So he also attends St. Peter's Episcopal Church, where he served as a Eucharistic minister. Wesley, with the love of his life and spouse Trey Owen, recently celebrated 36 years together. They live in Charlotte, North Carolina, with their 2 dogs, Astro and Jackson. And I know Wes, over the years, our paths have crossed at numerous conferences and meetings, and so I'm really thrilled to welcome him here today. Please give a warm hand to Wes Thompson.
Thank you guys, and I hope you won't mind if I use the lecture, because I made notes because there were so many things I wanted to say, and so I'm not preaching, but I might pass it away. I do have a mortgage. Thank you guys for having me, and those of you who know me, when I speak from my heart, sometimes I get emotional, so if I get all weepy, just give me a second to catch up with myself. Thank you to the Reunion Project for inviting me to be part of this 2-day town hall. I'm honored to be your keynote speaker today, and pleased to be presenting on breaking boundaries with resilience. I will share my perspective from 4 decades of providing care and partnering with my patients. And that's a key part of successful care for me, is partnering with my patients. Not parenting them, but partnering with them. And all too often in medicine, we're taught to be a parent and do as I say rather than let's come to an answer together. People with HIV face numerous adversities at several levels. The individual level, for example, trauma, internal stigma, the judgment we place on ourselves. Interpersonal level, external stigma, the judgment that others in society place on us. And neighborhood level, for example, socioeconomic determinants such as food insecurity, housing insecurity, and transportation challenges. These adversities have been linked to negative health behaviors and outcomes. Put another way, these adversities can cause us to make bad choices, such as turning to alcohol, drugs, or giving up on care, and our health suffers from it. While aging is not an adversary, and something most of us consider a blessing, aging does bring new challenges for our HIV patients. As I reviewed research online regarding the topic of HIV and resilience, I found that much more research is needed in resilience. One definition of resilience is to withstand and overcome adversities, or to bounce back. One of the researchers defined resilience as the utilization of resources such as positive, psychological, behavioral, and or social adaptation in the face of stressors and adversities. That's a mouthful. Resilience draws upon an individual's capacity combined with families and communities' capacity and resources to overcome serious threats to development and in health. In other words, it takes collaboration with others to succeed in healthy living. We are or should be connected to others for our best health. We've come a long and miraculous way since the days before we had treatment. In the mid-1980s, when I started caring for HIV patients, I mostly held hands and went to funerals. Today, I go to baby showers and weddings. Then, as medications became available, and finally what we call highly active antiretroviral therapy in the early 1990s, now known as antiretrovirals or just plain HIV medicines, patients began to survive HIV/AIDS. However, their health was their full-time job. Patients had to navigate multiple dosing schedules, food restrictions, and debilitating side effects, just to mention a few. There was little time to think of the future, much less plan for longevity. I'm going to give a little history now of HIV for those of you who may not know its full story. June 5th, 1981, in a magazine called the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, two separate reports, one from Los Angeles discussing a rare PCP pneumonia in 5 homosexuals. And in New York, there were 6 homosexuals with a rare skin cancer called Kaposi sarcoma that only happens usually to people from the Mediterranean or very old people in their 80s and 90s. By June 1982, it finally made the news. Now, at first, it was gay bowel syndrome because it was so much GI problems, and that was one of the first signs in many of our early patients. Then it was known as the gay-related immune deficiency syndrome. But in September of 1982, the name acquired immunodeficiency syndrome came into being. Now let me back up a little bit further for the rest of the history. We have stored specimens of blood and body tissue from 1959. The oldest one is a brain surgeon from Kinshasa, but then it was known as the Belgian Congo. His brain tissue, he died of the slimming disease, as they called it in Africa. And his brain tissue shows HIV virions. Now, there were more specimens in that lab where they stored things, but there was a flood, and all of the specimens from 58 and further back were lost to the flood. We do know that if we look at HIV right now and what it looked like in 1985, because we have stored specimens, and we look at that brain surgeon specimens, we can taper that back by looking at the genetic drift. Remember, HIV mutates 1% every year, so we can get a good guesstimation that HIV crossed over into humans sometime between 1887 and 1917. but it was in the small villages of Cameroon, and it really didn't get mixed around very much. We now know the two different monkey species that make it up, the mangabey and the green rhesus. Those were used as protein sources like we use chickens, cows, and pigs. And at some point, blood, getting stuck with a bone, getting bit, those two separate viruses that were killing those monkey strains or Ascidian strains got into some patient zero at some point. And then eventually, as transportation, gasoline, and the great train that was once considered a prize in Kinshasa, everybody funneled into Kinshasa to work, and the virus began to spread. The earliest known cases we have outside of Africa are in Haiti in the 1960s, and that was due, thanks to planes and increased air travel. The first known case we have in the United States is 1971, and it was a 16-year-old hemophiliac in St. Louis, Missouri. And of course he died, and they stored specimens from his body and later went back and looked. Earliest case in Europe was 1976, and it was a sailor from Oslo, Norway, who had been stationed in Africa. So that's how far back it actually goes. We think of it as this recent occurrence in 81, 82, but that's just when it finally hit the American scene. Now, we've come a long way since then, and I'm going to talk about that. But I wanted you to have a little reference that this has been around a lot longer than we often think about. And our news and media didn't pay attention to it then, and I'm going to talk about it mainly because it was afflicting our gay community, and that community was not accepted. And then it got into the broader community, and then unfortunately it moved into our communities of color, which have not been prioritized traditionally by our government or our healthcare system. That's just a known fact. I don't apologize for that. I state it. So, nationwide, in the face of an unresponsive government and society to this growing epidemic, groups like ACT UP began demanding a response to HIV by government and industry, especially pharmaceutical companies. A community facing near obliteration, refused to give up. This community was from across the spectrum of socioeconomic background, ethnicity, religion, etc. And as a coalition, they took to the streets and held massive protests around the country and participated in various and mostly nonviolent demonstrations to demand action. I remember I was living in the Raleigh-Durham area, just starting with my HIV training and working with patients, and ACT UP were chaining themselves to a building in the Raleigh-Durham area at the doors of a place called Burroughs Welcome, where a brand new, although an old medicine, but a brand new treatment called AZT was being tested. And we didn't know then that one drug was not enough. It took us a while to figure out that we needed 2 or 3 or 4. But nonetheless, thanks to their efforts, medicines got out quicker, and it got in the news, and pharmaceutical companies upped their game. But for those individuals that participated in that, I call that resilience. Our medications continue to evolve, and eventually we arrived at single tablet regimens. And with each new regimen that has come out, side effects and food restrictions have become rare. Patients began to think about the future. Prior to highly active antiretroviral therapy, the lifespan of an HIV/AIDS patient was on average 18 months to 3 years after diagnosis. In 1997, with our successful use of highly active antiretroviral therapy starting in 1994, that's when we truly had 3-drug therapy from 2 different classes. The Multi-Center AIDS Cohort Study Collaborative, also known as the MAX Group, announced that an HIV patient adherent to medications and who maintained a healthy lifestyle could live another 10 years after the date of diagnosis. We felt like that was a miracle, especially those of us from Duke. You know, we like to think of ourselves as gods anyway. But we were, you know, it was life-changing. I just took you from 18 months, 3 years, to a decade. So that was really amazing. But it didn't stop there. In 2007, the Max Group updated the number to an additional 20 years after diagnosis. You know, that's time enough to graduate from high school, have a baby, get married, or get married and have a baby. Where I'm from, it's usually have a baby and then get married. But still, 20 years, 2 decades. Then in 2010, the Max Group updated the lifespan to 26 years after diagnosis. And finally, in 2012, the Max Group announced that it was possible for our HIV patients to live as long as our HIV negative patients. So I find that to be nothing short of a miracle. The Max Group has not updated it since then. I don't really know that you can get much better than, you know, that's how far we've come. Now, 11 years later, we are seeing this statement come true. Our patients are not only surviving, but thriving. Our patients are living into their 60s, 70s, 80s. This would have been unheard of in the 1980s and 1990s. With this longevity comes all the health changes common to aging. However, aging with HIV brings additional challenges, and that is where resilience is needed. When I first moved to Mecklenburg County in 1997, patients were experiencing considerable stigma from the community. There were few places patients could go without fear of stigma, and it took courage to seek care and stay in care. Most primary care providers would not treat HIV/AIDS due to the lack of knowledge, their own personal fears, and often their own personal judgment regarding HIV/AIDS patients. Never mind that this violates the Hippocratic oath that all medical providers take. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. Refusing to treat patients is a violation of this oath, no matter the field of medicine you're in or your personal religious beliefs. We medical providers are not to judge. Here in Mecklenburg County, one of our early organizations was Metrolina AIDS Project, which started in 1985 by 6 gay men. It was the first to see the patient with a holistic perspective, and I mean holistic beginning with a W, because I mean the whole patient and the patient's needs. They tirelessly coordinated the moving pieces of care needed, and patients benefited from it. When Metrolina AIDS Project closed in 2009, many organizations and individuals stepped in and began to fill the needs of the HIV/AIDS community. House of Mercy provided end-of-life care, death with dignity. RAIN was established in 1992 to help those afflicted with HIV/AIDS and provided death with dignity through care groups. Community support systems were just beginning to provide much-needed services such as housing, transportation, food, mental health services, and substance abuse services. From the patient's perspective, it was hard, and it took courage and resilience to navigate a fragmented system. In the ensuing years, I have seen a collaboration of organizations come together, and our patients have benefited from an improved quality of life, which has led to greater adherence to treatment, improved health, and a reduction in new cases of HIV. So what is resilience for our HIV patients? I would call it the protective effect of conscientious health, including mental, emotional, and physical. For our HIV patients to succeed with resilient aging, it is a partnership of patient, family, friends, and the community, and a partnership with oneself. The ability to forgive oneself and not be afraid to seek help when needed increases the ability to resist negative psychological responses when confronted by stress and trauma. Said another way, it helps us to resist making bad choices. A positive outlook regarding oneself leads to a healthier life. Let me give you some examples of resilience in my patients. During one of my lectures to an all HIV positive female support group in Fayetteville, North Carolina, I commented about taking care of one's health. And I used a phrase which has now fallen out of care, that's patient living with HIV. And it has fallen out of care because you are either living with HIV or you're not living with it. The American Academy of HIV Medicine performed large focus groups across the nation to learn what and how language impacts HIV patients. Language can be stigmatizing internally and externally. What people call a patient and how that patient perceives how they're looked at. So I was really happy that we performed this. The overwhelming feedback from patients was that they prefer the phrases patient with HIV or HIV positive. So during that lecture, one of the attendees raised her hand and stated, "Dr. West, I'm not living with HIV. HIV is living with me
Period. Let's go.
because I'm in charge."
That's right.
That is resilience. One young man came to me with an AIDS diagnosis. As I finished my exam and suggested a treatment plan, I told him what to expect and with his CD4s, the number that we measure to account for your health. And I told him that, what they would rise in the first year and the second year and the third year. He left and came to all of his appointments and took his medications. At the 1-year follow-up, we discussed how he was doing and how he had a robust CD4 in the 800s and an undetectable viral load. It was then that he told me, prior to his appointment with me, he had planned his suicide for right after that first appointment. So while he was planning his death, I was planning his future. And he decided he likes my plan better.
No.
Oh, yeah. That is what's up, Chris.
He is alive and well today. That is resilience. Another example is the woman who came to me pregnant during the 1990s. I told her what we knew then regarding the chance that her unborn child would be positive, and that her lifespan was probably 10 years. She persevered and had an HIV negative baby. And she is alive and well today. She has had additional children, all HIV negative. That is resilience.
Yes, Lord. I love it.
Then there is the flight attendant. With HIV and well controlled, who then developed lymphoma, excuse me. He continued his HIV treatment and went through chemo and radiation and beat the lymphoma until the lymphoma returned 5 years later. He restarted chemo and radiation and never wavered in his HIV care. Today, he is running marathons
Okay.
on a regular basis. That is resilience.
Yes, Lord.
My final example is an HIV patient with mental health and addiction issues. He continually relapsed with mental health and taking his HIV medications, as well as his addiction. But he kept picking himself up and kept working with his case manager and me. He admitted he needed help, and he sought help repeatedly. He is still in care and now approaching his mid-60s. That too is resilience.
Yes, Lord.
This resilience in our HIV patients is the key to successful aging. What have I observed in my patients? Those who have achieved a higher perceived quality of life and a general positive attitude towards the world and recognize the randomness of life have succeeded in breaking boundaries with resilience and courage. Thank you. I talked a little fast. Those of you who know me know I do that. So, are there questions that anybody has for me?
I'm curious. Questions? I have a comment. Thank you for comment. I bragged about you yesterday.
Thank you.
And I love you and I miss you. So I'm so grateful that you did take the time out to come here and share that with us. You know, I'm your number one cheerleader. So thank you. Listen. So thank you for still being available for the community to reach out to you to come out and share stuff like that with us. Yeah.
So you have retired, but did you clone yourself?
Well, I would like to say I have been grooming a young man for the last almost 10 years to be the new Wesley. I think he's speaking to you this afternoon, and that is Jason Harden. He's not as good looking as me. Probably a little bit smarter. I think he's a fantastic addition to our community.
Well, I want to thank you for, you know, I'm one of your cheerleaders as well. Whew. The community needs providers like you
We do.
that relates to people with HIV. Not just because you're a doctor or a nurse practitioner, but because you care about the community. It's hard to it's hard to accept that you're in retirement.
Y'all making me cry. It is.
Just because you rocked and rolled with us
Yeah.
for a decade.
Yeah.
You've always been available to the community.
To the community.
I tell people all the time, you know this disease in your sleep. And you can't come to nobody in this community can do so. They can tell you about HIV, but not like you. It's a difference. And that's what our community is lacking. Because you're only one person, and everybody wants a piece of it.
I do now.
Thank you, Dee Dee.
Yeah.
So again, thank you for taking time out to come to us today.
It wasn't easy to retire, Dee Dee, because my patients bring me great joy, and all of the long-term relationships I've had with many of you and so many others has brought great joy to me. It's given me purpose. It was not easy to make that choice, but my own health required that I slow down. So I did retire from patient care. And like this today, I am still going to be available. I'm still going to be here in the community, and I'll still be a voice and an advocate. I do ask, there has been a setback in health for my husband, who has new cancer. Some of you may have seen about it on Facebook, and his dementia has progressed some. So there is a need for me to be home more. So it was not an easy decision, but it was a necessary decision.
Yeah. I just told Dee Dee that you need to come back every 3 to 6 months to see me, or I'm gonna be in the driveway and it's gonna be me and Trey that you're taking care of.
I'm gonna give you your flowers while you're still here, Dr. West.
Yeah, I'm making me
And anywhere you went, I was following you.
Yeah, me and you both, girl.
And I'm so sorry. Uncle Trey, And I appreciate Jason. Girl. Jason. Y'all gonna meet him. But, thank you so much.
Do we have a
Thank you
question?
so much for giving me all those years. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I think we had a question in the back.
If you had one thing to change about this disease, what would you change? Other than not being here. Or what would you say has been the most demeaning part of
I'm one of those who believes in the butterfly effect and that every action yields more and more actions. HIV taught me a humbleness with patients, and it took away any arrogance that I had as a medical practitioner. And I'm honored for having that. So I wish that our government and science had been quicker on its response. We are not going to have a vaccine in our lifetime, and we need to stop waiting for it. But we do have a vaccine of knowledge. That is the thing I am most proud of, and I would like to see changed and become more aggressive about, and that's PEP, PrEP, and TASK. TASK, treatment as prevention. U equals U. If you are undetectable, you cannot pass it on. And we know this. We've known it for years now. PrEP, that treatment that is kind of like birth control for HIV, available in shot and injection form. And before long, we're going to have an implant just like birth control for HIV. So we've got exciting things in the future. I'm really, the landscape is there. And then PEP, of course, is if you weren't on PrEP and don't have HIV, but you got exposed, if you go on that within 3 days, you won't get HIV either. We've been doing that since 1997. So I call that the trinity of ending the epidemic: PEP, PrEP, and TASK. And if we could get that everywhere, that would effectively stop the epidemic. Now the challenge is getting that out into the communities. And I'm so proud of so many organizations represented in this room today and others who have realized that if Muhammad will not come to the mountain, take the mountain to Muhammad. You know, they've got mobile clinics, and they're taking those mobile clinics and they're taking care and dispensing medication, testing, treating, getting people started. That is an answer that's been happening around the country, and I'm proud that these organizations in Mecklenburg County have begun to do so as well.
Yeah.
So, I guess the only thing I would change is just to work harder at getting that knowledge out to the priority populations that need to hear it. Great question, thank you.
And I'm
Yes, Jim.
Thank you for your talk. And so some of us are working in the cure advocacy realm. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that? Do you talk about it with, or were you talking about it with your patients, or what do you want people to know about that?
I want them to know that realistically, we don't have a vaccine, and that we're looking at other ways, what we would call a functional cure, a grouping of medications, monoclonal antibodies, TLR7 molecules, and a combination of these may work. Now, many of you know we now have 4 people that have been cured of HIV, but it's using a very special infusion of the CD4s that do not have a little spike on it called the CCR5. And without that spike, HIV cannot latch on and use that CD4 to replicate more of itself. HIV only lives 7 hours before it dies. So if that individual viron or virion, which data about it, if it doesn't find CD4 to latch onto within 7 hours, it dies. So that's how, they had to be taken to the edge of death with chemo, radiation, destroy their bone marrow, and then give them this infusion of these new CD4s. The fancy name is homozygous delta 32 mutation. If you want to know the fancy name. It's one of the reasons that some people are long-term survivors or long-term non-progressors, is the term I should have used. They have one of those. You have to have both, one from mama, one from daddy, to actually be immune to HIV. It's been around for about 700 to 1,000 years. This mutation allowed Scandinavians that had that mutation to avoid the plague. And now we jump forward to the 21st century, and those rare few who have it on this planet, which we estimate 0.6% of the population of the planet has that mutation, are naturally immune to HIV. So research into that, maybe gene manipulation, finding a way, and what the possible ramifications are, would be part of the cure. But what I tell people for now, the cure is the answer to following PEP, PrEP, and FAST.
Take your medication and go to the doctor.
Dr. Wesley, I work with a community of older people living with HIV who, and as far as myself, I believe I'm already cured. When I was first diagnosed, I had a CD4, and they told my daughter I had 6 months to live. But the medication has kept me alive. So I'm looking at it like that's my cure. But the people in the community where I work, everybody's kind of skeptical about this new research, and they don't want to participate. They're like, if I'm not broke, don't try to test me. They're comfortable where they are. So I know you should push research on anyone, but without us, there can be no research for a cure. I'm sort of like you. We'll never get to 2030 ending the epidemic because we still have a high rate of stigma. That's keeping a lot of people in the closets. I'm ashamed, don't want to take medication. I've had some patients tell me, if I got it, I want to die. I don't want to know I have it. So when you're dealing with a group of people who don't want to do research, don't believe in research, what advice can you give them that's on the brighter side, like something coming from the future?
All right, I will have to go a little bit personal about that.
Okay.
Many of you know that I have a spiritual journey, and I believe in the trinity of the body, of mind, body, and spirit. And I believe that this body will die of something, whether that's complications of heart disease or a cancer or not taking care of your HIV. I believe that the mind is part of that, but I oftentimes tell patients, you know, this body is just what you're housed in right now. Your spirit, which is the only eternal piece of you, is HIV-free right now. And it will go on. The only eternal piece of you has never had HIV and will go on to what's next without HIV. And I try to encourage patients to look at it from that lens and say, if you want to help others and possibly find a way to end this epidemic, research is our only way.
It's the only way.
But I also respect if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I do try to change their minds because many patients said that about older regimens when they were taking 10, 12 pills. Well, I'm doing all right, I'm managing it. But, you know, really, going to the bathroom 7 times a day and taking medications 14 times a day, that was consuming their life. When I finally got them to switch over to fewer tablets and then to a single tablet, it was freeing. It was, and I said, you know, this is all thanks to research.
Perfect.
I think I've run over time, haven't I?
You all right?
Thank you so much.